Welcome to my channel. Enjoy the content and please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to me. On the day of the party, James woke up with a strange mix of excitement and anxiety fluttering in his chest. The sun beamed brightly, as if blessing the occasion. His small home, usually dull and bare, had been transformed. Colorful banners hung from the walls, balloons bobbed gently in the corners, and the scent of home-cooked food filled the air. It wasn't much, but to James, it was a celebration he had never thought possible. One by one, his friends arrived, their faces lighting up at the sight of the decorations. Some brought small gifts, others came with nothing but their presence and good wishes, which, to James, meant everything. Laughter rang out as they embraced, cracked jokes, and recalled old memories. The little room pulsed with warmth and life, a stark contrast to the loneliness James had felt for years. The food was served in generous portions: jollof rice, fried plantains, pepper chicken, and meat stew, all seasoned with care. Bottles of soft drinks clinked in toast to James's health and happiness. As they ate, the guests praised his cooking, not knowing the meal held a secret ingredient from a mysterious vial. James smiled through it all, his heart both light and heavy. Music played from a small speaker, and soon the crowd was on its feet. They danced with abandon, laughing and singing along to familiar tunes. James joined them, his feet moving freely, his spirit lifted by the joy around him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something real, like he belonged, like he mattered. He looked around the room and saw nothing but happiness: his childhood friend Paul laughing with a mouth full of food, Greg spinning in circles to the beat, then giving a dramatic toast with a soda bottle raised high. It was surreal. For a brief, golden moment, James forgot about rejection letters, missed meals, and long walks under the sun. He forgot about the weight of failure and the slap that had broken his spirit. All he felt was joy. But somewhere in the back of his mind, the native doctor's words echoed, "Only then would the path to your desires open." What did that mean? Would something happen tonight? Tomorrow? Or had it already begun? As the night stretched on, and the laughter softened into quiet conversations, James sat on the edge of his bed and watched his friends. He smiled to himself, a strange peace settling over him. As the celebration wound down, a chill crept over the room. Laughter and music still echoed in the background, but something felt off. One of James's friends, Paul, suddenly clutched his stomach, his face contorting in pain. He gasped, his hands shaking as he staggered to his feet. Before anyone could react, he fell to the floor, his body writhing in agony. "Paul!" James shouted, rushing to his side, but the sight was horrifying. Paul's lips turned blue, and within seconds, he began to vomit blood. His face twisted in terror, and before anyone could help, he collapsed completely. Panic erupted among the guests. Some screamed for help, others tried to carry Paul, but it was too late. James stood frozen, his chest tight with fear, unable to look away from the horror unfolding before him. Then, as if the sickness had spread like wildfire, another friend, Greg, suddenly fell to the ground, clutching his stomach and crying out in pain. He too began to vomit blood, his face pale with shock. Within moments, the room was filled with chaos. The once cheerful laughter had turned to screams and frantic cries for help. James's heart pounded in his chest as he watched one friend after another fall ill, each suffering the same terrible symptoms. The laughter and joy of earlier were replaced by a suffocating silence, punctuated only by the horrifying sound of people struggling for breath. James's mind raced, his thoughts a blur of confusion and terror. What had happened? The food had been fine, at least, he thought it had been. But the vial the native doctor had given him. Could it have been the cause? James's stomach twisted with guilt. The strange liquid he had added to the food. The native doctor's cryptic instructions. He had been so desperate for change, so eager to escape his suffering, that he hadn't stopped to consider the consequences of his actions. The room grew quieter, the guest now lying lifeless on the floor. James's hands trembled, his body cold with fear. One by one, his friends had fallen to the same fate, and he could do nothing but watch. He felt as if the world was closing in on him. His chest tightened, and the weight of the guilt was unbearable. How could he have been so blind? How could he have let his ambition cloud his judgment so completely? The lives of those he loved, taken so swiftly, for the price of his own desire for wealth and success. Before anyone could notice his presence, James turned and fled into the night, his mind racing with horror. His body moved on instinct, his feet carrying him away from the scene of devastation. The cool night air felt like a slap to his face, but it did nothing to clear the fog of panic and guilt that enveloped him. He ran through the streets, not knowing where he was going, only that he had to get away from the dead bodies of his friends, away from the consequences of his choices. As the night swallowed him whole, James's heart screamed in anguish. The wealth he had so desperately sought had come at a price far greater than he could have ever imagined. In the distance, the sounds of sirens began to wail, but James was already lost to the night, alone with the haunting realization of what he had done. James's heart hammered in his chest as he ran through the dark streets, his legs burning with exhaustion. His mind was a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. He had to get answers, he had to understand what had just happened. His thoughts were consumed by the memory of the party, the laughter, the joy, and then the horrific sight of his friends collapsing one by one. He couldn't comprehend how it had all gone so terribly wrong. The familiar sight of the native doctor's hut appeared in the distance, and James's breath quickened as he stumbled toward it. He had to confront the man who had promised him a new life, who had given him the vial that he now believed had caused the deaths of his friends. He reached the door, his hands shaking as he knocked frantically. The native doctor opened the door slowly, his expression calm and unreadable. "You've come back," he said in a low, measured tone. James's voice cracked as he spoke, his fear overwhelming him. "What happened?" he gasped. "All my friends, they're dead. I don't understand. What did I do wrong?" The native doctor stepped aside and motioned for James to enter, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling calmness. "Congratulations," the native doctor said, his lips curling into a small, cryptic smile. "You have successfully completed your task." The words hit James like a slap. "What do you mean?" he demanded, his voice desperate. "What task?" "You told me." The native doctor raised a hand, silencing James. "You wanted to change your fate, didn't you?" he asked, his voice eerily soft. "You sought wealth, success, and a better life, and you were willing to do whatever it took to get it." James's mind reeled as the native doctor's words sank in. The realization hit him like a wave. The price of his ambition had been far greater than he could have ever imagined. He had killed his friends, all for the chance at a better life. The native doctor's words twisted in his head, and he felt as though the room was spinning around him. The native doctor continued, his voice growing colder. "You wanted something more than what you had, James. You sought power, riches, and recognition. But ambition always comes with a cost. You were too eager to sacrifice the lives of those you loved for your own desires. James's stomach turned, and his knees buckled beneath him. He sank to the floor, tears welling up in his eyes. His entire life had been spent chasing a dream that had led him to this terrible moment of destruction. He had betrayed his friends, the very people who had once supported him. His guilt was overwhelming, suffocating. "I didn't mean for this to happen," James whispered, his voice breaking. "I just wanted a better life. I wanted to help my family." The native doctor's expression softened for the first time, but it wasn't compassion, it was a cold, calculating understanding. "That's the tragedy, James. You thought you could take the shortcut to your dreams. But life doesn't work that way. The universe demands balance. You've paid the price, and now there is no turning back." James stood up slowly, his legs trembling beneath him. He felt a deep sense of emptiness, as if everything he had worked for had vanished in an instant. The weight of his choices pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket. He had lost everything. Driven by a mix of fear, guilt, and shame, James turned and fled from the native doctor's hut. The dark night swallowed him whole as he wandered aimlessly, lost and alone. The memories of his friends, their laughter, and their lives now seemed like a distant dream, one that was forever out of his reach. He was left to carry the unbearable burden of his ambition. The price he had paid was far greater than he could ever have imagined. Years passed, and James's life transformed in ways he had never imagined. With his newfound wealth, he built a successful business empire. He was no longer the struggling handyman, wandering the streets in search of work. Instead, he owned a large company, a symbol of his success. His business grew rapidly, and soon he had multiple houses, luxurious cars, and a life that many would envy. The community regarded him with respect, and he was often sought after for advice and guidance. James married a beautiful woman, Peace, who loved him for the man he had become. Together, they had 4 children, each one a reminder of the family James had dreamed of providing for. They lived in a beautiful house, surrounded by the trappings of wealth. From the outside, James had everything he could ever want. He had reached the pinnacle of success, the dream he had worked so tirelessly to achieve. But despite his outward success, there was a deep emptiness inside James. The memories of that fateful night, the night when his friends had died, haunted him like a shadow. The laughter of his friends, their joyful faces as they danced and celebrated, echoed in his mind. He would often find himself lost in thought, his heart heavy with guilt. It didn't matter how much money he had or how many houses he owned, the faces of those he had sacrificed for his ambition would never leave him. James tried to bury the past. He focused on his family, on providing for his wife and children, hoping that time would heal the wounds in his heart. But no matter how much he tried to move forward, the ghost of his friends lingered in his thoughts. He would hear their voices in the quiet moments, and sometimes, in his dreams, he would see them once more, smiling and laughing as if nothing had ever changed. The wealth he had accumulated, which he had once thought would bring him happiness, felt like a heavy burden. It was a constant reminder of the price he had paid. His success came with an unbearable cost, the lives of those who had been closest to him. James realized that no amount of money or status could ever bring back the people he had lost. He had achieved everything he had ever wanted, yet something deep inside him was forever broken. One evening, as James sat alone in his office, staring out at the city skyline, he felt a deep sense of loneliness. Despite his achievements, he was still haunted by the memory of the lives he had destroyed in his pursuit of wealth. The silence in the room seemed to mock him, and he realized that true success could never be measured in material wealth alone. James's mind drifted back to the day when he had made the choice to seek out the native doctor. The desire for wealth and a better life had consumed him then, but now he understood the true cost of that ambition. He had lost the very people who had once supported him, and no amount of money could ever replace what he had sacrificed. As time passed, James's wealth began to feel like a prison. At first, he thought the whispers were just the wind, a trick of the mind, but the sounds grew louder and more persistent. Each night, he would hear them, faint voices calling his name, murmuring in the darkness, accusing him of his actions. Shadows would shift at the edges of his vision, as if they were moving just beyond the corner of his eye. It felt as though his friends' spirits were watching him, waiting for justice, waiting for retribution for their untimely deaths. James could no longer escape the weight of his guilt. The once joyous life he had built, full of luxury and success, now felt hollow. His wealth, which he had worked so hard to attain, no longer brought him happiness. Instead, it brought him unease and dread. Every step he took, every business decision he made, felt as though he were being judged by invisible eyes. He would lie awake at night, the silence of the mansion surrounding him like a suffocating shroud. The laughter of his friends, their faces filled with life, haunted him, and he could not shake the deep sense of sorrow that clung to him. In his desperation, James sought out the help of many native doctors, hoping that one of them could find a way to rid him of the haunting memories and the restless spirits of his past. He traveled far and wide, consulting with shamans, healers, and wise men who were known for their mystical powers. He begged them for a solution, for an escape from the guilt that tormented him. But each native doctor, no matter how powerful, told him the same thing: you must face what you have done. James recoiled at their words. He was terrified. Confronting the ghost of his past meant acknowledging the horrible choice he had made, the lives he had taken in pursuit of his own selfish desires. He did not want to relive the horror of that night, the night when his friends had died, their blood staining his hands. But the guilt was relentless, and no matter how much wealth he accumulated or how many people respected him, he could not outrun it. So, James turned inward. He buried himself in his work, thinking that if he focused enough on his business and his family, he could drown out the whispers and the shadows that plagued him. He spent long hours in meetings, signing contracts, and expanding his empire. But the harder he worked, the louder the voices became. They echoed through the halls of his mansion, in the streets he walked, in the very air he breathed. The more he tried to ignore them, the stronger they grew. The luxury he had once craved now felt like a hollow shell, a reminder of the cost he had paid for his ambition. The wealth that had seemed so important was now meaningless, overshadowed by the constant presence of his past. No matter how many achievements he accumulated, James could never escape the truth: he had sacrificed the lives of his friends for his own success, and the price for that ambition was a lifetime of regret and guilt. Eventually, the weight of James's guilt became unbearable. The haunting whispers and the shadowy figures that seemed to follow him everywhere drove him to the brink of despair. He had once been a proud, successful businessman, but now, all that was left of his dreams were shattered pieces. His health deteriorated rapidly as stress and sleepless nights took their toll. The once thriving company that he had poured his heart and soul into began to crumble under his neglect. Employees left, investors withdrew, and debts piled up. The wealth he had once been so proud of slipped through his fingers, leaving him with nothing but the cold emptiness of his choices. James's family, once proud of his accomplishments, now looked at him with a mix of concern and disappointment. His wife, Once the beautiful woman who had stood by his side, now struggled to keep their household together. His children, who had been born into a life of comfort, saw their world falling apart around them. The lavish home they had once enjoyed was now a hollow shell, filled with silence instead of laughter. One evening, James found himself sitting alone in the dark, his mind consumed by regret. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, whispering his name and reminding him of the friends he had lost. The faces of those he had killed in his pursuit of wealth flashed before him, their eyes accusing him, their voices demanding justice. He realized too late that the ambition that had driven him to betray his friends, to make a deal with forces beyond his understanding, had come at a terrible cost. The laughter that had once filled his home was now replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. James could no longer escape the realization that his greed and lack of integrity had led him down a path of destruction. His success had been built on the blood of his friends, and now he was paying the ultimate price. The wealth that had once seemed like the answer to all his problems had turned into a curse, and he could not outrun the consequences of his choices, and he died. When James died, the truth of his past was revealed to his family and the community. His wife and children were left in abject poverty, forced to survive without the man who had once promised them a better life. The beautiful life James had built vanished overnight, and his family faced the same hardships he had tried so desperately to escape. They became trapped in the cycle of poverty, just as James had been before his ambition had led him astray. The legacy James left behind was not one of success and prosperity, but a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the high price of sacrificing integrity for wealth. His story became a cautionary tale for others in the village, a reminder that ambition without morality could lead to a life of regret, sorrow, and loss. In the end, James's story became a cautionary tale in the village. People spoke of the boy who had risen from poverty but had paid a terrible price for his ambition. They learned that success built on dark deeds comes with a heavy burden. James' name became synonymous with the dangers of unchecked ambition, a warning to those who sought wealth at any cost. The villagers, once inspired by James' hard work and drive, now viewed him through a different lens. They remembered him not just for his wealth but for the choices he had made, choices that ultimately led to his downfall. Over time, the tale of James' rise to power and subsequent fall spread from generation to generation, becoming an important lesson for the young and old alike. It became clear to the villagers that true success is not measured by money or status, but by the kindness we show to others and the integrity we uphold. The villagers recognized that the cost of ambition, when pursued without regard for others, could lead to a life of regret and pain. As the sun set over the village, casting long shadows across the ground, the story of James served as a reminder to all: ambition is a powerful force, but it must be pursued with a pure heart. Otherwise, the cost may be too great to bear. As time went on, James's story was passed down with a sense of reverence. It was no longer just a tale of a boy who had made a dangerous pact, but a reminder to the villagers that wealth and success, when gained at the expense of others, ultimately lead to ruin. Through his mistakes, the village had learned what it truly meant to be successful, to live a life rich not in money, but in love, friendship, and integrity. The memory of James's tragic journey continued to shape the hearts and minds of all who called the village home, ensuring that future generations would never forget the price of ambition and the importance of staying true to one's values.